So my name is Thierry Carrez. I work for the OpenStack Foundation, and today I want to talk to you about what is OpenStack. So that may sound like an easy question, and we had the show of hands earlier showing that most people in the room know what is OpenStack. Actually don't know what is OpenStack, which is kind of scary. It's not as easy of a question as you think, because OpenStack, if you ask Jonathan or Monty, they would probably have a very different answer if you just ask them, well, so what is OpenStack? And the reason for that is OpenStack is a lot of different things to different people. There are multiple ways to look at it. There are multiple facets that you need to consider when you consider OpenStack as a whole. My usual elevator pitch answer when someone looks at my T-shirt on a random hotel somewhere and asks, well, so what is this OpenStack thing? My usually short answer is to say that OpenStack is an open source project. But that doesn't mean a lot. That doesn't mean anything at all, because there are lots of ways of doing open source. Doesn't really mention what OpenStack actually tries to solve, if that's something you should be using. So that's like the worst answer ever. And if you want a more complete answer, you kind of need to go back to the bottom, back to the original motivation around OpenStack. And if you get to the bottom, OpenStack is a common goal. It's the idea that we need an open source software stack to build interoperable cloud infrastructure. And that's embodied in the OpenStack mission, which is, and I quote, I couldn't remember this one, to produce the ubiquitous open source cloud computing platform that enables building interoperable public and private clouds regardless of size by being simple to implement and massively scalable while serving the cloud users' needs. So this goal, we have a number of organizations that rallied behind that goal. So OpenStack is also a coalition of organizations. If you're an organization that wants to build a public or a private cloud, and you are not Amazon or Google or Microsoft, you probably don't want to start from scratch. And so you also have companies that kind of want to help you in that space, help you build those public and private clouds. And so all those companies kind of rallied behind the goal that we set early for the OpenStack project. But it's not necessarily natural for companies to collaborate openly and to build something together. And that's why we needed a foundation. So OpenStack is also a foundation, an open source foundation. And when we talk about open source foundations, we usually separate what we call the upstream from the downstream. So the upstream is the way you produce the software, like people writing code, producing the software. And the downstream is all the usage you get out of the software that's been produced. So like users, packaging, building products on top of it. That's what we call the downstream. And open source foundations provide services in 3 different areas. The first one is the asset lock. It's the idea that you kind of need, if you want companies to collaborate around an open source project, they will not collaborate openly and as much as they could if one of them is holding the keys to the kingdom. So you kind of need to have this neutral construct to hold the common assets. The main asset that the OpenStack Foundation holds is the OpenStack trademark. So OpenStack is also a trademark. It's the idea that you should control what can be called OpenStack and what cannot be called OpenStack. And the way the OpenStack Foundation enforces the OpenStack trademark is to foster interoperability. So OpenStack is also an interoperability standard. It's the idea that we should not call OpenStack things that are not sharing enough characteristics to be interoperable. So that's the way we are using the OpenStack trademark for. And that's where the DevCore and interoperability work groups that are out of the OpenStack Foundation board of directors are working on. And it's an extremely important thing because, like Monty said, interoperability is actually key and one of the big advantages that OpenStack has over other solutions. On the sharing downstream part, it's the idea that all the people that use OpenStack should be able to share as much as they can. The most obvious thing that the OpenStack Foundation does to cover the downstream side is, of course, events. That's the most visible part of the iceberg. This is a picture from the OpenStack Summit in Vancouver a few years ago. And so there are events we directly organize. Next one in Barcelona in less than a month, or slightly more than a month now. And there are also events we encourage people to organize, like those OpenStack Days, which are really great events to get the local community to show up and present things. So we support them by being present and giving them all the tooling around it. There are also a number of other co-marketing resources that the OpenStack Foundation produces. Jonathan mentioned the user survey, which is a very important tool to get an accurate picture of the OpenStack market. We also do white papers. We also do certifications, all the things that Jonathan actually already mentioned. And finally, we also encourage the formation of a very engaged operator community. I was in New York a few weeks ago to attend the operator mid-cycle, and it's really refreshing to see all those people that are using OpenStack ready to share as much best practices as they can in a very open forum. So we're very glad to have a very engaged operators community that gets together and is ready to share openly best practices on large deployments, small deployments, and they would share pain points, all those things that are extremely interesting for the feedback back to the development. The third area is enabling upstream. It's the idea that you should provide an environment for the upstream open source project to strive, a healthy environment. We do that by providing an independent upstream. So OpenStack is also an independent upstream. What do we mean by independent upstream? It's the idea that the software, the open source project part of OpenStack should be driven directly by the contributors to the project, rather than have technical leadership out of, corporate members of the foundation. So it's extremely important to have, for an open source project, your contributions aligned with the technical leadership of the project. Because if your contributors don't feel like they're represented in the technical leadership of the project, at some point they will take the code away from that organization that holds the control over the technical side of things and build their own. That's called forking, and it's something we kind of wanted to avoid from the ground up when we built the OpenStack governance. And so we built a governance system that made sure that we would avoid that by having regular elections. We elect the technical leaders for each project every 6 months with a one contributor equal one vote system. We also renew the technical committee every year. So every 6 months we renew part of the technical committee to make sure that technical leadership remains aligned with the contributors. And that's kind of a novel governance model. It's not natural for an open source project to be started like this from day zero. It's usually something you evolve over time when you realize past mistakes, and it takes a lot of years usually. And I'm very grateful for the understanding from the companies that built the OpenStack Foundation originally, that supported the OpenStack Foundation originally, for allowing this to happen from day zero. It's the right thing to do, but it's not the easy thing to do. So OpenStack is also a governance model. It's a bit of a social experiment. Can that work? Can we have really, truly democratic technical leadership in a very large open source project? The next part is that by placing those contributors at the middle of the game, it's really the center of the game is controlled by the contributors. You can't really influence the direction of the open source project without having some contributors helping to push that through. And that kind of created a job market around OpenStack contributors, because you build value on your influence and your past contributions on your name, and so you become a very interesting person to hire in other OpenStack companies. And it's quite common to see people going from one company to another It's still working on exactly the same thing in OpenStack. I don't count how many times Monty has been changing companies now, but is it like 5?
I work for all of them.
Okay, so Monty worked for all of them doing the same thing, which is interesting. So OpenStack is also an interesting job market. But that's all structural, and you might want to know what, like more technically, what OpenStack is. So OpenStack technically is a set of projects, lots of different projects. We have 31 service projects in the upcoming Newton release. And so you know the name, Nova, Keystone, Horizon, Swift, and others. And that the fact that it's a set of projects created tension about what is within OpenStack, what is not within OpenStack in various projects in the community, and I'll come back to that later. But the important part to realize is that OpenStack is, being a set of projects, is also a single project. It's also under a single technical governance. It's also tries to make sure that the experience of operating all those different components stays something you can enjoy. The main aspect of that is that if every project went completely independent in their silo, the user experience of operating them together would probably be pretty miserable. And so we work at the technical community to make sure that we share enough between projects, we cooperate enough between projects, we integrate enough between projects to ensure a consistent user experience across OpenStack as a single thing. We do that by enforcing a set of principles. So OpenStack is also a set of principles. Principles, processes, and the most concise set of principles we have are called the 4 opens. So there is open source. It's the idea that we do open source code, obviously, Apache 2 license. We also do open development. Everything in OpenStack is publicly visible. You can access proposed changes, comment on reviews. You can see all the meetings are happening on IRC in public forums. All the discussions are happening on the public mailing list. Everyone can see what's happening in there. We also do, and that's slightly more rare, open design. It's not like a separate group of developers that get together in a secret corner and design the overall design of OpenStack and then ask the rest of the community to do bug fixes. It's we do, every 6 months, we get all the contributors together to help planning the next phase, the next release cycle, and that's open forum. You can also just get in there and participate to those discussions. And finally, we do open community. It's the idea that anyone in OpenStack can access a leadership position. You don't necessarily have to be employed by one of the corporate members of the foundation to become a leader in OpenStack. A lot of projects do some of those. Like everyone does open source those days. Some of them do open development. Some of them will do open design. But it's a rare thing to have all those opens get together in a single project. And we do all of them. The result is that OpenStack is a development community. It's a set of people sharing the same goals, same mission, and following the same principles. And so if you're aligned with the OpenStack mission and you follow the OpenStack processes and agree with the OpenStack principles, then you're part of the OpenStack community. So it's a pretty large definition. And that's what made us realize at some point when we are trying to draw the line between what is in OpenStack and what's not in OpenStack, that if we take the angle of that development community, if you're part of the OpenStack development community, if you help with the OpenStack mission and you're part of and you follow the OpenStack principles, then what you work on is probably also OpenStack. And that's what triggered the Big Tent project structure reform. It's the idea that we should not look into a project that is produced by the OpenStack community really early on and try to decide if it's cloud or not cloud, if it's valuable, not valuable, is it promising or not promising. We just try to see if it's produced by the same group of people following the same principles and operating with the same, under the same processes. Does it help with the OpenStack mission? Is it produced by people that are in the OpenStack community following our principles and processes? Then yes, then you're an OpenStack project. You might not be the most mature one, but you're an OpenStack project. At the very bottom, OpenStack is a bunch of code. It's mostly written in Python. The idea we chose Python in the first place is that it's a powerful language. It's really easy to learn. My 10-year-old daughter is learning Python currently. It's not that easy, but it's easy to learn, it's easy to read, it's easy for operators to dive into and spot bugs and whatnot. At the same time, we have these discussions around adding other programming languages to the set of programming languages we can use within OpenStack, like Go. And I think it's a difficult balance to strike. On one hand, you want to give developers the tools they need to produce the best software ever. On the other hand, you need to be mindful of making sure you don't create a rift in your community between people that share things around Go and share things around Python. We built a lot of tooling around Python. We have shared libraries. If you start an OpenStack project, you have like 80% of your work done within shared libraries that we have across projects, and we don't have any of that on the Go side. So it's a balance. We need to conservatively add languages, like be mindful of the community effects, but not close the set of projects just arbitrarily. And that's an ongoing discussion within the OpenStack technical community. For some of us, especially Monty and me as well, OpenStack is none of those things. OpenStack is a continuous integration system. It's a way to build software. It's a set of rules. Monty elaborated on them, code reviews, gated commits. It's an extremely effective way of building software. And to give numbers, Monty gave better numbers than I will. 23,000 is the number of test jobs we actually run on a typical day in OpenStack. Most of those tests, like he said, are running for like 40 minutes, spinning up complete cloud systems. And that's actually a lot of changes. The idea is we should test every proposed change to see if that will not break OpenStack as a whole. And since it's complex to test, it's not really tested unless we do it automatically. And that's what drove this cloud-based system we have for testing changes. And my point behind that is that OpenStack might not live forever, but the system, the project infrastructure we built to sustain its development will probably outlive it. It's an extremely efficient system, and I'm confident that we built something that can be replicated to other projects as well. And that points to the fact that OpenStack is a very active open source project. So OpenStack is also a very active open source project. It's sometimes easy to lose sight of it. Jonathan has been showing very large numbers on the screen earlier. But if you just read like news headlines, you might think that the largest things ever are more in the containers world now. And so to compare like project activity, this is a graph showing commits changes over the last year for a number of projects. There is the Linux kernel, which is admittedly the largest open source project out there. There is Kubernetes, Docker, which are like the things that are put up on every slide to attract people in conferences those days. And there is OpenStack at the top. If you just take projects, which are like services we produce, we actually compare quite well with the Linux kernel. If you add up everything that is built within the OpenStack community, like infrastructure, all the support repositories we have for specs, for governance, for elections, etc., and all the packaging stuff, so people working on Debian packaging or on Ansible packaging, Puppet packaging, it's actually the largest project out there. And it's not like for bragging rights or anything, but sometimes it's really difficult to lose sight of the scale of this project and how far it went. And so it's a good reminder that we are one of the most active open source project out there. So summarize, what is OpenStack? I didn't answer that question. I said many things, right? I would argue that OpenStack is all those things together. It's a common goal, it's a set of companies, it's a foundation, it's a bunch of Python code, it's a set of projects, it's a single project. It's a well-oiled machine to produce infrastructure software. It's a CI system, it's a set of principles, it's a development community, it's a set of events. All those things together make OpenStack an extremely efficient machine to produce software. And in the end, it's back to the integration engine that Jonathan mentioned. It's the idea that we are there to produce infrastructure software, integrating any kind of technology that comes next. Today, it's VMs, bare metal containers. Tomorrow, unikernels, whatever. The system we built, all those things together, is ready to integrate future technology as it comes. So investing in OpenStack today, you should be ready for the next wave of innovation, because the same community with the same principles, same systems, can address and integrate future technology around infrastructure. And that's the goal we're following. Thank you.